into it, get into it, yes! We're back! Jang, Jaka-jang, Sayuki Favale. Anybody who's seen Dragon Ball Daima knows what I'm talking about. I'm a huge Dragon Ball fan, and I have this amazing cup that I got during Pride here in Yellow Springs. This is technically Dragon Ball. They definitely misread this by putting Z, because this cast is all of the original Dragon Ball cast. But, yeah, I love it. And orange is my favorite color. Shout out to my coworker James for also wearing orange today. I have my orange button down. It was like a Hawaiian flamingo shirt. It was very pretty. My first time wearing it in public. And shout outs to my friend Emma for hooking me up with that. Also, shout out to my friend Travis, who helped me get my groceries when my bag ripped after we got a huge torrent of heavy rain. And it's been going on like this all day, and honestly, I'm here for it because we need this rain in order to cool down. It has been so humid lately here in Ohio. It is ridiculous. I have never been a person who has ever been wanting to sit outside, like to dine at a restaurant outside. That's one of the reasons. You never can know what's going on with the weather. It could change in a minute. Bugs are everywhere, and this is their environment. We're just invading it. And it's hot, and I don't want to sweat over my food, personally speaking. That's just me. For those who, usually people who love to go to eat outside are people who typically work indoors all day and want to just be out in the essence of life and just be like, yes, let me take in this good air and this good weather. And this is elderberry pop, by the way. It is made with cane sugar. It is evergreen elderberry, and it is honestly really delicious. Shout out to Current Cuisine. Because it is amazing. Excuse me. But you didn't come to hear me talk about my day. You came to hear a story. All right, we're actually almost to the end of part 1 of this story. But let's go ahead and continue into our reading. And no, I don't own the music that you're listening to in the background. Chapter 6, Bird Rock. There was no way of telling whether they were deep inside Craig Yr Advern or had walked through the gray rocky doors into another place or time. It did not matter to Will. Exhilaration was pulsing through him in this true beginning of his first full quest as an old one. Turning to look back, he saw without surprise that the doors through which they had come were no longer there. The rocky wall at the end of the chamber where they now stood was smooth and unbroken, and upon it, high up, there hung a round golden shield, glinting dully in a light that came from somewhere deep within the room. Will looked tentatively at Bran, but the Welsh boy seemed unperturbed. His pale face was oddly vulnerable without its protective glasses, but Will could read no expression in the cat-like eyes. He felt once more an intense curiosity about this strange boy with no color in him, born into the dark, haunted valley, mortal, and yet also a creature foreknown by the Old One centuries before. How was it that he, Will, an Old One himself, could sense so little of Bran's nature? "You okay?" he said. "I'm alright," said Bran. He was looking up at the walls behind Will. "Twah," he said softly. "Beautiful. Look at those." It was a long, empty room. On its walls hung 4 tapestries, 2 to each side, their rich colors so deeply gleaming that they too seemed to shimmer in the half-light like the golden shield. Will blinked in recognition at the images embroidered there, rich as stained glass, a silver unicorn, a field of red roses, a glowing golden sun. Which unicorns are one of my favorite mythical creatures. And I personally believe that they were on this earth at least once. All the light in this room seemed, he now saw, to come from only one flame. In an iron holder jutting from the stone wall near the end of the room, a single tremendous candle stood. It was several feet high, and it burned like a white, unwavering flame of intense brilliance. The long shadow of the candle lay over wall and floor, motionless, undancing. Its beyond light or dark or any allegiance, Will realized was the stillness of the high magic, the strongest and most remote force in the universe, which soon in this place he and Bran must face. There was a faint whistle whine at his side, scarcely audible. He looked down and saw the dog, Kaval, gazing backwards at Bran. Will said softly, "Go on, then." Excuse me. The dog's cold nose nudged his hand, and Kaval turned and trotted briskly back to his master, waving his tail. Bran thrust his fingers into the fur of the dog's head in quick, fierce affection. And Will knew that for all his calm appearance, there was in his mind an uncertainty approaching panic, which Kaval had sensed and sought to reassure. Will felt a quick tug of sympathy for Bran, but there was no time for explanations. He knew he must trust his instinctive feeling that in the last resort, the strange remoteness almost apparent in Bran would prove to be the strangeness of great strength. He said aloud without turning, "This way." Then he walked firmly down the long, lofty chamber. Bran followed with Kaval. Will could hear the footsteps ringing with his own on the stone-paved floor. He reached the tall candle in the wall. In its iron holder was set into the stone at the level of his shoulder. The smooth white sides of the candle reached far higher, high above his head, so that the white flame glowed up there like a bright full moon. Will paused. "First the moon," he said, "then stars, and, if all is well, a comet, and then the dust of the stars, and at last, the sun." "What?" said Bran. Will glanced across without really seeing. Behind his eyes, he was looking into his own mind and memory, not at Bran. Here in this place, he was an old one, accompanied with the affairs of the light. Nothing else had very much relevance. He said, "It is the order of things by which the high magic shall be known, so that none may come within reach of it except by birthright." Bran said, "I still don't know what you're talking about." He shook his head in quick, nervous apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound—" "It doesn't matter," Will said. "Just follow me. You'll see." The footsteps rang out again, and then they were at the end of the long room, and there was nothing before them but a blank hole in the floor. Bran peered at it dubiously. Will said, "Do what I do." He sat on the edge of the rough, rectangular opening in the floor, and in a few moments he could see a staircase running downwards at a steep angle. Cautiously lowering himself, he found the stairway was narrow and dark. It was like going down into a well. When he put out a hand to either side, each hand at once touched rock, and the rock of the roof, too, was very close to his head. He went slowly down. In a moment he could hear Bran's careful footsteps following, and the soft scratch of Kaval's paws. For a little while the glimmer from the upper chamber reached down after them, casting wavering patterns of shadow on the close walls, but soon even that faded, and there was no light in the stair tunnel at all. In its sides, Will's fingers round two smooth channels carved to form balustrades, a steadying refuge for the hand of anyone descending. He said quietly, his voice eerily echoey, "Bran, if you put your hands out—" "I found them," Bran said. "Like banisters, aren't they? Bright idea if somebody's that." The words were cool, but there was tension behind them. Their voices boomed gently in the stairway, muffled as if by mist. Will said, "Go carefully. I may stop in a hurry." He was straining to hear the voice of his instincts. Random images and impressions flickered in and out of his mind. Something was calling him, something close. Close. He put out a hand in front of him, and just in time to save himself from coming hard up against a blank wall of rock. There was no other stair ahead, only a stony, dead end. "What is it?" said Bran behind. Wait a moment. An instruction was growing inside Will's memory, like an echo from another world. Standing with his feet planted firmly on the last stair, he put the palms of both hands flat against the rough, unseen rock face, barring their way, and he pushed. At the same time, he said certain words in the old speech that came into his mind. "Chiver de liberté." They were no longer... The rock parted silently, as it had when the great doors opened silently on Bird Rock. Though no music sounded here, with Bran and Kaval at his heels, Will stepped forward into a faint glow of light that caught him into such wonder that he could only stand and gaze. They were no longer where they had been. They stood somewhere in another time, on the roof of the world. All around them was the open night sky, like a huge black inverted bowl, and in it blazed the stars, thousands upon thousands, brilliant prickles of fire. Will heard Bran draw in a quick breath. They stood looking up. The stars blazed around them. There was no sound anywhere in all the immensity of space. Will felt a wave of giddiness. It was as though they stood on the last edge of the universe, and if they fell, they would fall out of time. And as he gazed about him gradually, he recognized the straight inversion of reality in which they were held. He and Bran were not standing in a timeless dark night observing the stars of the heavens. It was the other way around. They themselves were observed. Every blazing point in that great deafness hemisphere of stars and suns was focused upon them, contemplating, considering, judging. For by following the quest of the golden harp, he and Bran were challenging the boundless might of the high magic of the universe. They must stand unprotected before it, on their way, and they would be allowed to pass only if they had the right by birth. Under that merciless starlight of infinity, any unrightful challenger would be brushed into nothingness as effortlessly as a man might brush an ant from his sleeve. Will stood waiting. There was nothing else that he could do. He looked for friends in the sky. He found the eagle and the bull with Aldebaran glowing red and the Pleiades glimmering. He saw Orion brandish his club high, encouraging, with Beetlejuice and Regals winking at shoulder and toe. He saw the swan and the eagle flying towards one another along the bright path of the Milky Way. He saw the hazy hint of distant Andromeda and Earth's near neighbors, Tau Ceti and Procyon, and Sirius, the dog star. In longing hope, Will gazed at them in hope and in salutation, for during this time of learning the ways of the Old One, he had flown amongst them all. Which, if you remember, this is when, during the Dark is Rising, which is book 2, Will read the Book of Gramarye, which is a book made by Merriman Lion, aka Merlin, which houses all of the knowledge of the Old Ones that have come before. And he was the last out of the Old Ones, so he was like the 100 of the 100, basically, if that makes sense. So he knows all of the names of the stars, can true name people and places and things. Everybody has a name, and everybody has a true name. If somebody can give you your true name, or call you by your true name, they have power. Power for good. Then the sky wheeled, and the stars slanted and changed. Now the centaur galloped overhead, and the blue double star Acrux supporting the Southern Cross. The Hydra stretched lazily over the heavens, with the lion marching by, and the great ship sailed its leisurely, eternal way. And at last a brilliant point of light with a long curving tail came blazing into view over half the inverted bowl of the sky, moving past in a long, stately progress. And Will knew that he and Bran had survived their first ordeal. He pressed Bran's arm briefly and saw a flicker of reflected light as the white head turned. "It is a comet," Bran whispered. Will said softly back, "Wait, there's more, if all is well." The long, flaring tail of the comet moved gradually out of sight, down over the horizon over their nameless world and time. Still in the black hemisphere, the stars blazed and slowly wheeled beneath them. Will felt so infinitesimally small that it seemed impossible he should even exist. Immensity pressed in on him, terrifying, threatening, and then in a swift flash of movement like dance, like the glint of a leaping fish, came a flick of brightness in the sky from a shooting star. And then another and another, here, there, all around. He heard Bran gave a small chirrup of delight. A spark struck from the same bright, sudden joy that filled his own being. "Wish on a star," said a tiny voice in his head, from some long-departed day of early childhood. "Wish on a star," the cry of a pleasure and faith as ancient as the eyes of man. "Wish on a falling star," said Bran soft in his ear. All around them, the meteors briefly dived and vanished as tiny points of stardust in the long travel of their clouds struck the airy halo of the earth, burned bright, and were gone. "I wish," said Will fiercely in his mind. "I wish. Oh, I wish. and all the bright starlight sky was gone in a flicker of time that they could not catch, and darkness came around them so fast that they blinked in disbelief at its thick nothingness. They were back on the staircase beneath Bird Rock, with stone steps under their feet, and a curved stone balustrade smoothed to the slightless touch of their hands. And as Will stretched out one hand groping before him, he found no blank wall of stone there to bar his way, but free open space. Slowly faltering, he went on down the dark stairway, and Bran and Caval followed him. Then very gradually, faint light began to filter up from below. Will saw a glimmer from the walls enclosing them, then the shape of the steps beneath his feet, then appearing round a curve in the long, tunneling stairway, the bright circle that marked its end. The light grew brighter, the circle larger. Will felt his steps become quicker and more eager, and mocked himself, but could not help it. Then instinct caught him into caution, and on the last few steps of the staircase, before the light, he stopped. Behind him he heard Bran and the dog stop too at once. Will stood listening to his senses, trying to catch the source of warning. He saw, without properly seeing, that the steps on which they stood had been carved out of the rock with immense care and symmetry. Perfectly angled, smooth as glass, every detail as clear as if the rock had been cut only the day before. Yet there was a notable hollow in the center of each step, which could only have been worn by centuries of passing feet. Then he ceased to notice such things, for awareness caught at him out of the deepest corner of his mind, and told him what he must do. Carefully, Will pushed up the left sleeve of his sweater as far as the elbow, leaving the forearm bare. On the underside of his arm shone the livid scar that had once been accidentally burned there like a brand. The sign of the light, a circle quartered by a cross. In a deliberate, slow gesture, half defensive, half defiant, he raised this arm crooked before his face, as if shielding his eyes from bright light or warding off an unexpected blow. Then he walked down the last few steps of the staircase and stepped out into the light. As he stepped to the floor, he felt a shock of sensation like nothing he had ever known. A flare of white brilliance blinded him and was gone. A brief, tremendous thunder dazed his eyes and was gone. A force like a blast wave from some great explosion briefly tore at his body and was gone. Will stood still, breathing fast. He knew that beneath his singular protection, he had brought them through the last door of the high magic, a living barrier that would consume any unsought intruder in a gasp of energy as unthinkable as the holocaust of the sun. Then he looked into the room before him, and for a moment of illusion thought that he saw the sun itself. It was an enormous cavernous room, high roof lit by flaring torches thrust into brackets on the stone walls, and hazy with smoke. The smoke came from the torches, yet in the center of the floor burned a great glowing fire, alone with no chimney or fireplace to contain it. It gave no smoke at all, but burned with a white light of such brilliance that Will could not look straight at it. No intense heat came from this fire, but the air was filled with the aromatic scent of burning wood, and there was the crackling, snapping sound of a log fire. Will came forward past the fire, beckoning Bran to follow, then stopped abruptly as he saw what lay ahead. Hazy at the end of the chamber, 3 figures sat in 3 great thrones that seemed to be fashioned out of smooth gray-blue Welsh hooded robes of differing shades of blue. One robe was dark, one was light, and the robe between them was the shifting greenish blue of a summer sea. Between the 3 thrones stood 2 intricately carved wooden chests. At first there seemed to be nothing else in the huge room, but after a moment of gazing, Will knew that there was movement in the deep shadows beyond the fire. In the darkness, all around the 3 illuminated lords, these were the bright figures of a dark canvas, lit to catch the eye. Beyond them in the darkness, other things of unknown nature lurked. He could tell nothing of the nature of the 3 figures, beyond sensing great power, nor could his senses, as an old one, penetrate the surrounding darkness. It was as if an invisible barrier stood all around them, through which no enchantment might reach. Will stood a little way before the thrones, looking up. The faces of the 3 lords were hidden in the shadows of their hooded robes. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the burning fire. Then out of the shadows a deep voice said, "We greet you, Will Stanton, and we name you by the sign. Will Stanton, Sign Seeker." "Greetings," Will said in as strong and clear as a voice as he could muster, and he could pull down his sleeve over his scarred arm. "My lords," he said, "it is the Day of the Dead." "Yes," said the figure in the lightest blue robe. His face seemed thin in the shadows of his hood, his eyes glimmering, and his voice was light, sublime, hissing. Yes. Echoes whisper like snakes out of the dark, as if 100 other little hissing voices came from nameless shapes behind him, and Will felt the small hairs rise on the back of his neck. Behind him, he heard Bran give a muffled, involuntary moan, and knew that horror must be creeping like a white mist through his mind. Will, straight as an old one, rebelled. He said in a quick, cold reproach, "My lord." The horror fell away like a cloud whisked off by the wind, and the lord in the light blue robe softly laughed. Will stood there frowning at him unmoved, a small, stocky boy in jeans and sweater, who nonetheless knew himself to possess power worthy of meeting these three. He said, confident now, "It is the Day of the Dead, and the youngest has opened the oldest hills through the door of the birds, and has been let pass by the eye of the high magic. I have come for the golden harp, my lords." The second figure in the sea blue robe said, "And the raven boy with you?" "Yes." Will turned to Bran, standing hesitantly nearer the fire, and beckoned him. Bran came forward very slowly, feet as unwilling as if they swam against treacle, and stood at his side. The light from the torches on the wall shone in his white hair. The lord in the sea blue robe leaned forward a little from his throne, then glimpsed a keen, strong face and a pointed gray beard. He said, astonishingly, "Kaval?" At Bran's side, the white dog stood erect and quivering. He did not move an inch forward, as if obeying some inner instruction that told him his place. But his tail waved furiously from side to side, as if it never waved for anyone but Bran. He gave a soft, small whine. White teeth glinted in the hooded face. "He is well named, well named," Bran said jealously, in sudden fierce anxiety. "He's my dog." Then he added, rather muffled, "My lord." Will could feel the alarm in him at his own timidity. But the laughter from the shadows was kindly. "Never fear, boy. The high magic would never take your dog from you. Certainly the old ones would not either. In the dark might try, but would not succeed." He leaned forward suddenly, so that for an instant the strong, bearded face was clear. The voice softened, and there was an aching sadness in it. "Only the creatures of the earth take from one another, boy. All creatures, but men more than any life. They take in liberty in all that another man may have, sometimes through greed, sometimes through stupidity, but never by any volition but their own. Beware your own race, Bran Davis. They are the only ones who will ever harm you in the end." I'm going to read that passage because honestly that resonates with me pretty deeply, because that says a lot about how human beings in the modern day are. "Only the creatures of the earth take from one another, boy. All creatures, but men more than any. Life they take, and liberty, and all that another man may have, sometimes through greed, sometimes through stupidity, but never by any volition but their own. Beware your own race, Bran Davis. They are the only ones who will ever harm you in the end." And he's referring to the human race of mankind. Earthlings, Terrans, whatever you wish to refer to them. Or Earthians in this case. Well, you can't see the book that I'm referring to, but it's up there. Dread stirred in Will as if he felt the deep sadness in the voice, for there was a compassion in it directly solely at Bran, as if the Welsh boy stood at the edge of some long sorrow. He had a quick sense of a mysterious closeness between these two, and knew that the lord in the sea blue robe was trying to give Bran strength and help without being able to explain why. Then the hooded figure leaned abruptly back and the mood was gone. Will said huskily, "Nevertheless, my lord, the rights of that race have always been the business of the light, and in quest of them I claim the golden harp." The soft-voiced lord in the lightest robe who had spoken first swiftly stood. His cloak swirled about him like a blue mist. Bright eyes glinted from the thin, pale face glimmering in the hood. "Answer the 3 riddles as the law demands, old one. You and the white crow, your helper there, and the harp shall be yours. But if you answer wrong, the doors of rock shall close, and you will be left defenseless on the cold mountain, and the harp shall be lost to the light forever." "We shall answer," Will said. You, boy, the first. The blue mist swirled again. A bony finger was thrusted, pointing at Bran, and the shadowed hood turned. Will turned too anxiously. He had half expected this. Bran gasped. Me, but I... Will reached out and touched his arm. He said gently, try, only try. We're here only to try. If the answer is asleep in you, it will wake. If it is not, no matter. But try. Bran stared at him, unsmiling, and Will saw his throat move as he swallowed. Then the white head turned back again. All right. The soft, sublime voice said, Who are the 3 elders of the world? Will felt Bran's mind reel in panic as he tried to find meaning in the words. There was no way to offer help. In this place, the law of the high magic prevented an old one from putting the slightest thought or image into another mind. Will was permitted only to overhear. So tense he stood, overhearing the turmoil of his friends' thoughts as they tossed about desperately seeking order. Sorry. Bran struggled. The 3 elders of the world. Somewhere he knew it was strange and yet familiar, as if somewhere he had seen or read the 3 oldest creatures, the 3 oldest things. He had read it at school. He had read it in Welsh, the oldest things. He took his glasses from his shirt pocket as if fiddling with them could clear his mind, and he saw staring up out of them the reflection of his own eyes. Strange eyes, creepy eyes, they called them at school. At school. At school. Strange, round, tawny eyes like the eyes of an owl. He put the glasses slowly back in his pocket, his mind groping at an echo. At his side, Caval shifted very slightly, his head moving so that it touched Bran's head. The fur brushed his fingers slightly, very lightly, like the flick of feathers. Feathers? Feathers? Feathers. He had it. Will, at his side, felt his own mind the echoing of relief and struggled to contain his delight. Bran stood up straight and cleared his throat. The 3 elders of the world, he said, are the owl of Kevin Clovid, the eagle of Grunalby, the eagle of Grunalby, and the blackbird of Kelly Gadarn. Gadarn, there we go. Blackbird of Kelly Gadarn. There we go. Will said softly, Oh, well done, well done. That is right, said the thin voice above them unemotionally like an early morning sky. The light blue robe swirled before them, and the figure sat back into his throne. From the center throne rose the Lord in his sea blue robe. Stepping forward, he looked down at Will behind his gray beard. His face seemed oddly young, though its skin was brown and leathered, like the skin of a sailor long at sea. Will Stanton, he said, who are the 3 generous men of the island of Britain? Will stared at him. The riddle was not impossible. He knew that the answer lay somewhere in his memory, stored from the great book of grammar, treasure book of the enchantment of the light that had been destroyed as soon as he, the last of the old ones, had been shown what it held. Will set his mind to work, searching, but at the same time a deeper riddle worried him. Who was this lord in the sea blue robe with his close interest in Bran? He knew about Caval. Clearly he was the lord of the high magic, and yet there was a look about him of... Will pushed them wondering aside. The answer to the riddle had surfaced in his memory. Will said clearly, the 3 generous men of the island of Britain, Nund, the generous son of Sinlet, Mordaf, the generous son of Serwan, Ridurk, the generous son of Twald, Tudgal, and Arthur himself was more generous than the 3. Deliberately on the last line, his voice rang echoing through the hall like a bell. That is right, said the bearded lord. He looked thoughtfully at Will and seemed about to say more, but instead he only nodded slowly. Then sweeping his robe about him in a sea blue wave, he stepped back to his throne. The hall seemed darker, filled with dancing shadows from the flickering light of the fire. A sudden flash and crackle came from behind the boys as a log fell and the flames leapt up. Instinctively, Will glanced back. When he turned forward, the 3rd figure, who had not spoken or moved until now, was standing tall and silent before his throne. His robe was a deep, deep blue, darkest of the 3, and his hood was pulled so far forward there was no hint of his face visible, but only shadow. His voice was deep and resonant like the voice of a cello, and it brought music into the hall. "Will Stanton," it said, "what is the shore that fears the sea?" Will started impulsively forward, his hands clenching his fists, for this voice caught into the deepest part of him. Surely, but the face in the hood was hidden, and he was denied all ways of recognition. Any part of his senses that tried to reach out to the great thrones met a blank wall of refusal from the high magic. Once more, Will gave up and put his mind to the last riddle. He said slowly, "The shore that fears the sea." Images wavered in and out of his mind, great crashing waves against a rocky coast, the green light in the ocean, the realm of Tethys, where strange creatures may live, a gentler sea then, washing in long, slow waves, an endless golden beach. The shore, the beach. The beach? The image wavered and changed. It dissolved into a green dappled forest of gnarled ancient trees, their broad trunks smooth like a curious light gray bark. Their leaves danced above, new, soft, bright with the delicate green that had in it all of springtime. The beginnings of triumph whispered in Will's mind. "The shore," he said, "the beach where the sea washes, but also it is a wood of lovely fine grain that is in the handle of a chisel and the legs of a chair, the head of a broom and the pad of a war-horse saddle, and I dare swear, too, that these two chests between your thrones are carved of it. The only places where it may be used are beneath the open sky and upon the open sea, for this wood loses its virtue if soaked by water. The answer to your riddle, my lord, is the wood of the beech tree." The flames leapt up in the fire behind him, and suddenly the hall was brilliant. Joy and relief seemed to surge through the air. The first two blue-robed lords rose from their thrones to stand beside the third, like three towers that loomed hooded over the boys. Then the third lord flung back the hood of his deep blue robe to reveal a fierce hawk-nosed head with deep-set eyes and a shock of wild white hair, and the high magic's barrier against recognition fell away. Will cried joyously, "Merriman!" He leapt forward to the tall figure as a small child leaps to his father and clasped his outstretched hands. Merriman smiled down at him. Will laughed aloud in delight. "I knew," he said, "I knew, and yet—" "Greetings, old one," Merriman said. "Now you are grown fully into the circle by this. Had you failed in this part of the quest, all else would have been lost." The bleak, hard lines of his face were softened by affection. His dark eyes blazed like black torches. Then he turned to Bran, taking him by the shoulders. Bran looked up at him, pale and expressionless. "And the Raven Boy," the deep voice said gently. "We meet again. You have played your part well, as it was known you would. Hold your head in pride, Bran Davis. You carry a great heritage within you. Much has been asked of you, and more will be asked yet. Much more." Bran looked at Merriman with his cat-like eyes unblinking and said nothing, listening to the Welsh boy's mood. Will sensed an uneasy, baffled pleasure. Merriman stepped back. He said, "3 lords of the high magic have for many centuries had guardianship over the golden harp. There are no names here in this place, nor allegiances in that task. Here, as in other places that you do not yet know, all is subject to the law, the high law. It is of no consequence that I am a lord of the light, or that my colleague there is a lord of the dark." He made a slight, ironic bow to the tall figure who wore the robe of lightest blue. Will caught his breath in sudden comprehension and looked for the thin face hidden in the hood, but it was turned away from him, staring out into the shadows of the hall. The central figure in the sea blue robe stepped forward a pace. There was a quiet authority about him, as if he were confident without pomp. He knew himself the master in that hall. He put back his hood, and they saw the full strength and gentleness of the closed, bearded face. Though his beard was gray, his hair was brown, only lightly gray-streaked. He seemed a man in the middle of his years, with all the power undiminished, yet wisdom already gained. But Will thought he is not a man at all. Merriman inclined his head respectfully, stepping aside. "Sire," he said. Will stared, at last beginning to understand. At Bran's side, the dog Kaval made the small sound of devotion that he had before. Clear blue eyes looked down at Bran, and the bearded lord said softly, "Fortune guard you in my land, my son." Then as Bran looked at him perplexed, the Lord drew himself up and his voice rose. "Will Stanton," he said, "two chests stand between our thrones. You must open the chest at my right and take out what you will find there. The other will remain sealed in case of need until another time that I hope may never come. Here, now." He pointed. Will went to the big carved chest, turned its ornate wrought iron clasp, and pushed at the top. It was so broad, and the carved slab of wood so heavy that he had to kneel and push upward with all the strength of both arms. But he shook his head in warning refusal when Bran started forward to help. Slowly, the huge lid rose and fell open, and for a moment there was a delicate sound like singing in the air. Then Will reached inside the chest, and when he straightened again, he was bearing in both arms a small, gleaming, golden harp. The hint of music in the hall died into nothing, giving way to a low, growing rumble like a distant thunder. Closer and louder it grew. The Lord, in the lightest sky-blue robe, his face still hooded and hidden, drew away from them. He seized his cloak and swung it round him like a long sweep of his arm. The fire hissed and went out. Smoke filled the hall, dark and bitter. Thunder crashed and roared all around, and the Lord in the sky-blue robe gave a cry of great rage and disappeared. And that is where we will end for tonight. Telling you, the plot thickens, y'all. And it's interesting. High magic is and there are many stories that kind of talk about it and refer to it, and depending on who you're reading, it could be different. But the high magic that they're talking about is neither of the light or the dark. It is a magic that is what made the universe in terms of fantasy. It is the stuff that creates stars, universes, galaxies, planets, the magic of creation. And the fact that you had a Lord of the Light and a Lord of the Dark and this third person who, I'm not going to spoil who it is, but is very important for this story, coming to terms with the fact that we need to do this in order for the universe to be stable. And I'm going to get into that next time we meet. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, lovelies. Bye-bye. Oh, yes, darling.